Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
What if the loss of one thing signaled the onset and progression of most chronic diseases? Would you want to know about it? Well, stay tuned as we explore the latest on a colorless gas that may be the key to chronic disease. Mission Evolution Radio TV is coming to you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and the X-Zone TV channel, divisions of Relmar McConnell Media Company, with studios and corporate offices in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. With us to explore the latest on nitric oxide, biochemistry, and its impact on our health is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Dr. Bryan earned his undergraduate Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry from the University of Texas and his doctoral degree from Louisiana State University School of Medicine, where he was the recipient of the Dean's Award for Excellence in Research. He's been involved in nitric oxide research for the past 20 years. Dr. Bryan, the author of Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition, is an international leader in molecular medicine and nitric oxide biochemistry. His website, n101.com. Dr. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Oh, Gwilda, thanks so much for having me. And I just corrected let me just one correction. It's N101, not 0.
N101. Okay.
N101.
Okay.
Yeah, one nitrogen, one oxygen.
Okay, I was wondering if that was the chemical signature for the nitric oxide. Okay, great. Now you have a pretty impressive bio. Only part of it was able to read because of the time constraints here. But would you share with our audience how you first became interested in researching nitric oxide?
Well, I've always had an interest in science and medicine. As an undergraduate at the University of Texas, I had an opportunity to do undergraduate research, and I really fell in love with the feeling of discovery. So from there, I went to LSU School of Medicine, where I enrolled in a PhD program in molecular and cellular physiology. And it was this was right after the Nobel Prize had been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. So we knew this field was extremely exciting. We knew it was important, but there were still a lot of unanswered questions in biology and human physiology. And so it was a right field, and it intrigued me that the human body would produce a gas that signaled. And so it was intriguing. There was a lot to be learned, and so it seemed like the perfect path for me.
Well, we won't talk about some of the gases the human body creates, right? So what is nitric oxide exactly?
Well, so as I mentioned, it's a gas, but it's a gas that's produced in the lining of the blood vessels specifically. And when it's produced, it signals the blood vessels to dilate, relax, and dilate, so we can increase oxygen delivery, increase nutrient delivery to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body. So that's its main function as a vasodilator, but it's also important in our immune system. It's how our immune system kills off viruses and bacteria, and it's how our brain cells communicate with one another.
It sounds like it's a pretty busy guy.
It's a very important molecule, and I think that's when you realize your body can't make it, or when your body can't make it, you start to realize certain manifestations of certain symptoms and diseases, and that's how we really learned how important nitric oxide is on the spectrum of human diseases.
So, forgive my ignorance, but I'm a layperson here. How can you tell if the lack of nitric oxide is the problem or it's a symptom of the problem?
Well, that was a very good question, and a question we have to go back 20 years, and that was really the basis for my research program is, number one, how does the human body make nitric oxide? What goes wrong in people that can't make it? And then how do we fix it? So today, and because there's no labs to really tell you what your nitric oxide levels are, we have to rely on symptoms. So if you have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure, that's a sign of nitric oxide deficiency. If you develop sexual dysfunction in both men and women, that's a sign of nitric oxide deficiency. Exercise intolerance, insulin resistance, basically every age-related chronic disease can be traced back to a loss of production of this single molecule.
So do we produce less as we grow older?
Well, on average, so if you look at kind of population-based studies, it will reveal that the older we get, the less we make. Now, that doesn't have to be the case. We certainly understand the enzymology and biochemistry to where we can prevent this age-related decline. But if you look at the typical American, as we age, we lose about 10 to 12% per decade. And this starts in the late teens, early 20s. So then by the time we're 40 or 50 years old, on average, we have only about 50% of the nitric oxide production capacity we had when we were younger. And I think this is the age that people feel the effects of aging. So it's not coincidental, it's causal.
But you say that we have no way of measuring it in the body. How can you tell when a person is deficient outside of symptoms?
Well, that's been, we do it in the research lab, but clinically it's not done. So we can measure certain nitric oxide metabolites. When nitric oxide is produced, it forms these other molecules that are more stable that we can detect and pick up in the blood or saliva. And about 14 years ago, I developed a saliva test strip, and it was really the first ever non-invasive point-of-care diagnostic for nitric oxide. So I tell people it's a good tool to have in your toolbox, but it should be the only tool you're using, because there's certain false positives. There are no false negatives. If you're low, you're low. But there are some false positives that we're concerned with, and that's the reason I've really gotten away from using the test strips clinically.
So if I understand what you're saying, if you show you're positive, you're flat positive, like you're pregnant, right? But
well, not necessarily. So it's just the opposite. So if you're negative,
okay.
You're negative. It's absolute. So it tells us that your body is completely devoid of any nitric oxide production. Now, it doesn't tell us why. Is it because you have endothelial dysfunction? Is it because you don't have the right oral microbiome? Is it because your diet isn't sufficient? So it doesn't tell us why. But the problem is the positive. So if you're positive, then that's where you have to start interrogating a little bit further. And the issue is the false positives due to an active immune infection. And we saw this clinically all the time. You would have a 50, 60-year-old overweight man with high blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, and he couldn't exercise. And then he would use the test strip and he would light it up bright pink, and the interpretation was he's optimal. Well, obviously that patient isn't replete in nitric oxide. He's completely devoid. But what we found later was he had an active oral infection. Because we're sampling the saliva, then that positive test in that particular patient is an acute immune response to an oral infection. It has nothing to do with his systemic health.
Okay. So did the infection create more nitric oxide or just messed with the test?
No, it actually creates more, and that's part of how our immune system works. So when we were encountering a bacteria or a virus or any pathogen for that matter, the job of our immune system is to go to the site of infection, or in the case of a virus, site of attachment, and then mobilize our immune cells. Our immune cells go there, generate a lot of nitric oxide over a short period of time, and that nitric oxide that's produced by our immune system kills bacteria, shuts down the respiration, and prevents viruses from replicating. So that's our innate immune response. But if our body can't make nitric oxide, then what happens? We can't mobilize an immune response. Our immune cells don't make sufficient nitric oxide. We get virus replication, propagation throughout the body. We get rampant bacterial infections, and we get sick. So our body's ability to mobilize our immune response, generate nitric oxide, predicts how resistant we can be to infections, viral infections. And we saw it over the past 4 years in COVID.
Okay, so how about, let's look at the other side of the coin. How about people's, inflammatory disease? People's immune systems are overactive. What's the relationship with that and nitric oxide?
Well, there's a feedback inhibition. The body talks, different body parts talk to other body parts. And so we published, I think, the first paper, and I think it was 2004, almost 20 years ago, that in a chronic inflammatory condition, we'll take ulcerative colitis or inflammatory bowel disease, where the colon is completely inflamed. We get a lot of nitric oxide being produced due to that immune response, but yet that nitric oxide completely shuts down constitutive nitric oxide production. So where there's a local overproduction in the gut, in the case of ulcerative colitis, systemically these patients become completely devoid of any nitric oxide production. And that's basic biochemical systems. There's feedback inhibition. The product inhibits the reactant.
So basically robbing Peter to pay Paul.
No, that's exactly right. And it's a main problem with people with chronic inflammatory disease, whether it's autoimmune disease, whether it's ulcerative colitis, rheumatitis. All of these are chronic inflammatory conditions where there's an overproduction at the site of inflammation, but yet systemically they become completely devoid of nitric oxide. And that's what leads to the vascular complications of autoimmune disease.
So the diseases that are inflammatory, people say, medical professionals say, well, just about every disease is related to inflammation. Okay. But then is this a deeper thing going on that is related to inflammation? But does the lack of nitric oxide also create inflammation, or overabundance of it create inflammation? What's the relationship there?
Well, you can't have one without the other. So there's things that go wrong. So we need inflammation, right? We need inflammation to repair a wound. We need inflammation to fight off infections. So the normal response, we have acute inflammation, right? We have an inflammatory response. We go in and we heal a wound or we kill an infection, and then everything down regulates. But in people with chronic inflammatory disease, it never gets the shut-off switch, right? There's never a rebalancing of inflammatory mediators. So then what happens, you have chronic inflammation, it shuts down nitric oxide production. But nitric oxide is anti-inflammatory. And so we've published on this a number of years ago that when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels, that causes vascular inflammation. So inflammation in the lining of the blood vessel is when the blood vessels become very sticky. You get immune cells sticking to the lining of the blood vessel, platelets aggregate, and sometimes you can form a clot and cause heart attack or stroke, or you just develop vascular inflammation, and that leads to the onset and progression of cardiovascular disease. So the loss of nitric oxide production leads to increased inflammation. Increased inflammation further suppresses nitric oxide production. So what we have to do in any inflammatory disease or any chronic disease, we have to get to the root cause of the inflammation. And if we give nitric oxide or restore the production of nitric oxide, you mitigate the inflammatory response and you downregulate the entire vascular inflammation, and then you prevent the immune dysfunction and oxidative stress. And those are the hallmarks of every single chronic disease: inflammation, immune dysfunction, and oxidative stress. And it's nitric oxide that controls and regulates all of those. So you cannot get ahead of inflammatory disease or chronic disease without first restoring the production of nitric oxide.
Do you, we're about out of time in this segment, but do you restore the production or do you supplement?
Well, my job as a biochemist and physiologist is to understand what goes wrong in people that can't make nitric oxide and fix the endogenous systems. So we do both. We have product technology that if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we do it for you. But included in that technology is we fix the reason your body can't make it. So your body continues to improve its ability to make nitric oxide on its own. And that's the goal. That should be the goal of medicine. Give the body what it needs. Let the body do its job.
Yeah, because it's built to go. Well,
Yeah,
it's time. Right. It's time for that station break. Dr. Bryan and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? With us this hour discussing the hidden role of nitric oxide in health and disease is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Dr. Bryan is an international leader in molecular medicine. Dr. Bryan, we were just talking about how this deeply woven relationship between nitric oxide and the immune system works. What's required to make nitric oxide? You say we quit making it, and that creates this problem here. But how do we make it? What's involved there?
Well, today we understand there's two primary mechanisms of nitric oxide production. There's one by an enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels we briefly discussed, and the enzyme that's found in our immune cells and our neurons. But there's also another pathway that's dependent upon diet, and it's dependent upon the oral microbiome and stomach acid production. And in fact, this is the mechanism of action of a plant-based diet, a Mediterranean diet, the Japanese diet. All these dietary patterns that are shown to be cardioprotective, have anti-cancer effects, can be explained by its ability to produce nitric oxide. So how does this work? So when we eat, for instance, some spinach or kale or arugula, green leafy vegetables, 90 minutes after we consume these vegetables, the nitrate, a molecule called inorganic nitrate, is taken up in our gut, concentrated in our salivary glands. Now for the next 6, 8, 10 hours, each time we salivate, we're secreting nitrate in our saliva. And then the bacteria that live on the crypts of the tongue metabolize this molecule. And humans don't have the ability to do this, so we're 100% dependent upon the oral microbiome. And now the bacteria reduce nitrate to nitrite, which, by the way, is what we're measuring in the test strip. And now when we swallow our own saliva, as long as there's sufficient stomach acid production, we get nitric oxide being produced in the lumen of the stomach.
Well, let me back up for just a second. Yeah, are you lots to unpack? Are you saying that the little buggies in our mouth actually are the ones that create it, not our body?
Well, they compensate for one another. So it's made in the lining of our blood vessels, and the bacteria also produce it. So one can compensate for the other. So if you develop vascular dysfunction, you can overcome it through the bacteria. When you're young and healthy, and you don't eat a lot of young kids don't eat a lot of green leafy vegetables, but yet they make sufficient in the lining of the blood vessels, so they're completely fine. But if you develop what we call endothelial dysfunction and the enzyme becomes uncoupled and dysfunctional, and you don't have the proper diet, or you use mouthwash, or you use antacids, now you completely become devoid of nitric oxide production, and that's when the onset of symptoms come in. So we take this one step at a time. So number one, you have to get enough nitrate from your diet, and the standard American diet, you don't get enough. Number two, you have to have the right oral bacteria, and 2 out of 3 Americans wake up every morning and use mouthwash, and it eradicates the oral microbiome, disrupts nitric oxide production, and causes an increase in blood pressure. And then thirdly,
You have good breath, right?
well, yeah, but to the demise of your own cardiovascular system.
Exactly.
And then the other major problem are antacids. There's 200 million prescriptions written for antacids every year. And that's not even counting the people that purchase these over the counter. And these drugs, specifically the proton pump inhibitors, completely shut down nitric oxide production. Now there's evidence showing that people have been on PPIs, things like omeprazole, Prilosec, Prevacid, pantoprazole, for 3 to 5 years have a 35% higher incidence of heart attack and stroke, and a 40% higher incidence of Alzheimer's. So antacids shut down nitric oxide production, cause heart attacks, strokes, and Alzheimer's. You have to get off antacids.
Goodness. So the antacids, does it have to do something with the base acid balance that creates the problem?
Well, there are a number of problems that go wrong when you suppress stomach acid production. Number one, you can't break down proteins into amino acids, so you develop foodborne allergies and autoimmune disease. Number two, you can't absorb basic nutrients like magnesium, which is needed to make nitric oxide, like iron, which is needed to make nitric oxide, selenium, chromium, things that help with metabolism and glucose uptake. So if you're taking an antacid, you become nutrient deficient, you develop autoimmune disease, and from my perspective, you completely shut down nitric oxide production, putting you at a greater risk of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. In fact, all age-related disease.
Good heavens. So let's talk about junk food. That's our major American diet, right? What impact does that have on the production of nitric oxide?
Well, sugar's the enemy. Sugar's a poison. Sugar's one of the most addictive molecules out there, and the standard American diet is replete in sugar. We eat too much sugar. So what does sugar do? Well, just like sugar binds to hemoglobin, and we call that hemoglobin A1C, sugar sticks to other molecules and enzymes. It sticks to the enzyme that makes nitric oxide and shuts down nitric oxide production. It completely disrupts the oral microbiome. So you lead to an increase in bad bacteria in the oral microbiome, a downregulation of the good guys. You develop an acid saliva, acid environment, which causes caries, gingivitis, periodontal disease. So everything that sugar does, everything that we know about sugar, the bad things about sugar, can be traced back to its ability to completely suppress nitric oxide production. So we have to eliminate, or at least greatly reduce, the amount of sugar consumption if we're ever going to overcome this worldwide pandemic of metabolic disease and diabetes.
Which sugars are the ones, who's the enemy here? Like, are fruit sugars okay? Who's the enemy?
Well, look, everybody's different, right? So every person's ability to deal with a sugar load or a carb load is completely different. Those with type 2 diabetes have lost the ability to regulate sugar. So they can't have any sugars, whether it's fruit sugars or highly processed sugars. Healthy people, our body deals with it because when we take in a sugar load, we secrete insulin. Insulin then tells the cell to clear the glucose from the circulation. But this whole process is dependent upon the cell's ability to produce nitric oxide. So if you've got a patient that can't produce nitric oxide, insulin is secreted, but glucose doesn't clear from the circulation because there's a breakdown in communication because of a lack of nitric oxide production. And that's the basis for insulin resistance type 2 diabetes. And we published, I believe in 2011, that if we could restore nitric oxide or give nitric oxide, we could potentiate insulin signaling, overcome insulin resistance, and help clear sugar from the circulation.
It's a nitric oxide is a gas, I understand.
That's right.
How do you supplement a gas?
Well, that's been a great challenge for 20 or 30 years. Big pharma's tried to develop safe and effective nitric oxide drugs. They failed. And so, I was the first to crack that code. I'm the first and only person on this planet who's ever made a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. And this took, many years of research and discovery and a lot of innovation. But we make a solid dose form of an orally disintegrating tablet that when you place this lozenge in your mouth, I designed it to have a specific resident time of about 5 to 6 minutes. And during that time, we're generating about 20 to 30 parts per million nitric oxide gas in the oral cavity. So it's not dependent upon the bacteria. It's not dependent upon stomach acid production. We generate nitric oxide the same amount in the same patient, no matter what. And that's really the key to doing this, because we know how much nitric oxide a healthy human makes over 24 hours, and we completely recapitulate that through our lozenge technology. So we never want to give the body something that it hasn't seen before, and we don't want to give something synthetic. So what we do is we understand what's missing in the human body in terms of nitric oxide production. We give that back, and more importantly, we understand the enzymology that we can now prevent the dysfunction of the enzyme, so we can make functional or recouple the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. And because we're delivering this on the tongue, we're restoring the good bacteria on the dorsal part of the tongue. Most pathogenic, bad halitosis or odor-causing bacteria are sensitive to nitric oxide. So when we give nitric oxide in the mouth, we kill the bad guys, we increase the diversity of the good guys, and completely restore the oral microbiome. So what does that mean? If your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you, but we fix the reason your body can't make it. So now your body's improving its ability to make nitric oxide on its own.
That's better than being dependent on something that you have to take all the time, right?
No, that's right. That's a great financial model, but physiologically, it's not a good model. My objective 25 years ago when I started this business is understand the mechanism of disease, that we could develop rational therapies. And the only way to do that is understand completely how the body makes nitric oxide, what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and now how do we fix it? And we've solved that riddle.
How does a person, do you have to, let me back up. Do you have to know, have tests and this and that to know what they're lacking, how much they're lacking to decide dose on the lozenges, or are they one size fits all?
Well, there's no such thing as one size fits all, because each one of us is different. Each one of us has an oral different microbiome. Every one of us has a different dietary patterns, lifestyle. So kind of broadly speaking, we tell people, if you're healthy and otherwise good shape, then one lozenge a day is completely fine. It's kind of your daily nitric oxide support. But if you're a little bit metabolically challenged and have an increased elevation in blood pressure, or you have metabolic disease or something like that, then we leave it to the practitioner to advise their patient using their best medical judgment on what dosing is best for them. And so we custom tailor it to each patient.
So the supplements are distributed through a practitioner?
Well, we do both. We've started out selling this through practitioners because we thought that the patient-physician relationship is one of the most trusted, right? And so very few people knew about nitric oxide, 12, 15 years ago. So we had to educate the docs, who then educated the patients. But now, times have changed. And now we need to go and educate the consumer, educate the patient themselves, so that they can take control of their own health. Because what we've realized is that Western medicine is not making anybody better. In fact, in many cases, it's making patients more sick. So we want to get the information out to the individual patients, direct to the consumers, inform and educate them on the importance of nitric oxide, so now they can take steps to control their own well-being and hopefully prevent getting sick.
Sugar addiction seems to be a huge problem in the United States, probably in Canada and elsewhere. Does supplementing nitric oxide help break up the sugar addiction in an individual?
No, I don't think there's any evidence for that. But here's what we do know, that nitric oxide is what helps potentiate the clearance of sugar from the body. I mean, if you look, taking nitric oxide is extremely important. In fact, it's foundational. But it's not going to overcome poor choices of continuing to eat a really unhealthy diet, continuing to be sedentary, continuing to take a lot of pharmaceutical drugs that, again, inhibit nitric oxide production. So we have to make lifestyle changes. But here's what we've found out, and it takes time to do this because you're changing people's habits. And changing people's habits is one of the most difficult things to do. So while they're developing the discipline to change their diet, change their lifestyle, when we take the nitric oxide, it actually helps their metabolism, helps them clear glucose, and really helps them prevent the onset and progression of really the metabolic disease and the vascular disease that occurs from a poor diet and poor lifestyle.
Pretty amazing. Would that possibly reduce sugar cravings? Can it break that cycle?
Well, I think it's all about metabolism and crosstalk, right? So when we eat sugar, we have a sugar load, we increase insulin, and then it starts this whole kind of perpetual cycle. So at some point, you got to break the cycle. And the only way to do that I've realized in 20 years of research in basic science medicine is you have to do intermittent fasting. You have to completely deprive the body of sugar for an extended period of time. And it completely changes the metabolism, the upregulation of certain genes, antioxidant genes, survival genes.
We're going to have to pick up on this on the other side of a break. This is time for a station break. We'll be back. You stay right there. What does nitric oxide have to do with erectile dysfunction? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the many roles of nitric oxide is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Dr. Bryan, I'm sure some of our audience is now curious about the relationship between nitric oxide and erectile dysfunction. Would you be so kind as to enlighten us?
Well, what I've learned over the past 20 years is that's the headline grabber, right? People aren't concerned with their high blood pressure or risk of heart attack and stroke, but when you bring up sexual dysfunction, it seems to get their attention. But yeah, so erectile dysfunction or sexual dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And so today we completely understand the etiology of erectile dysfunction. And by the way, this isn't just a male problem. It occurs in men and women. And if we look at the underlying physiology, so to have an erection, we have to increase blood supply, and we get what we call engorgement. Well, you can't increase blood supply to the sex organs without nitric oxide being produced, because nitric oxide is a vasodilator, meaning that it opens up the blood vessels, so now you can get more blood flow in. And in the man, you get more blood flow in, you prevent the outflow, and that's the erection. That's the fundamental physiological basis for erections. And then when we talk about women, and whether it's orgasms or erections in women, the same thing has to happen. Number one, you got to get dilation of the blood vessels. You got to get engorgement that builds up pressure. And it's that pressure that on orgasms are dependent upon that pressure. The pressure comes from an increase in volume. The volume comes from an increase in blood flow due to the production of nitric oxide. So if you can't make nitric oxide, nothing else happens. You don't get an increase in blood flow. You don't get an erection, and you become anorgasmic. And in fact, we've learned a lot about this from ED drugs like Viagra and Cialis and Levitra. So these drugs are dependent upon the body's ability to make nitric oxide. And that's why, by the way, maybe your audience didn't know this, but 50% of the men that are prescribed Viagra do not respond with better erections. Yet these drugs have been on the market for 25 years, and 50% of the people do not respond to that therapy. And the reason for that is the mechanism of these drugs are such that nitric oxide turns a switch on, and that switch is called cyclic GMP, and then the PD5 inhibitors prevent the breakdown of that second messenger. But without nitric oxide, there is no cyclic GMP, there is no effect of PD5 inhibitors or Viagra. So that tells us that the main reason for erectile dysfunction is insufficient nitric oxide production. Now, we know now that if we give nitric oxide, restore the production of nitric oxide, the patients that were previously non-responded to drugs like Viagra now become responsive. And by the way, you can lower the dose of those to make them safer and more effective. So we know exactly how to so-called prime the pump and potentiate this entire pathway using nitric oxide.
How many, obviously you're into studies, that's what you do. How many studies have you followed with different diseases with or without the nitric oxide?
Well, here's what we've learned over the past 20 years is originally we thought perhaps there's only one disease where nitric oxide would not be therapeutic and beneficial, and that would be in septicemia. So these are patients that have chronic systemic infections, and it was thought that the immune cells are making too much nitric oxide. It's leading to systemic vasodilation, hypoperfusion, end organ failure, and death. So the thought was, if we can inhibit nitric oxide production, can you prevent the systemic vasodilation, maintain perfusion pressure, and decrease end organ injury and death? So they did this study in the late 90s and gave a nitric oxide inhibitor. And to our surprise, the patients who got the nitric oxide inhibitor had a higher mortality. So that told us that, well, nitric oxide in sepsis is not a bad thing. In fact, inhibiting it makes patient worse. It increases death and mortality. So here's what we know today. There's really not, and it's all dose dependent, right? We know too little nitric oxide is bad. We know too much nitric oxide can be bad. So what we do in terms of our drug discovery program and our product development, is we basically give nitric oxide at doses and amounts that the human body normally produces. And so when we do that, when you consider that, I don't think, and the science corroborates this, that there's not a single disease indication where nitric oxide at the right dose, at the right time, in the right patient would not be beneficial. Now, it's our job, and what we're doing in our drug company, Bryan Therapeutics, is to go out and find those indications, find the right amount of nitric oxide in the right patient, and get a safe and effective drug approved and on the market through the FDA.
That would be lovely. What it causes an overproduction of nitric oxide, and it's damaging? You say, what kind of damage does it do?
Well, there's only two signs of toxicity for too much nitric oxide. Number one, if you generate too much, it'll lead to vasodilation and you'll get an unsafe drop in blood pressure. So you'll get syncope, meaning that you don't have enough perfusion pressure in the brain if you were to stand up, and you may get lightheaded or pass out. The other is what's called methemoglobinemia. And so it will oxidize the iron in hemoglobin in red blood cells and reduce the oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cell. And in this case, you start to get cyanosis, you'll get blue around the lips, and you basically become cyanotic and hypoxic. But the doses that you need to see any methemoglobin formation are way higher than what you would need to see an unsafe drop in blood pressure. But really, those are the only two true signs of toxicity: low blood pressure and methemoglobinemia.
And that the anemia doesn't have enough red blood cells to carry the oxygen, so that's why you become hypoxic or low in oxygen.
Well, it's not low red blood cells. You've oxidized what red blood cells are there, and so you lose the oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cells. So it's not anemia in the sense that it's methemoglobinemia, which means that you're oxidizing the iron in hemoglobin to what we call methemoglobin instead of oxyhemoglobin.
And it doesn't work the same.
It doesn't work the same. It's completely different chemistry.
It's so complex. I don't know how you walk your way through all of this. So can you get too much nitric oxide through supplementation?
You can. If somebody were deliberately wanting to hurt themselves, you could take too much nitric oxide and probably lead to an unsafe drop in blood pressure and perhaps even methemoglobinemia. Just like, you can overdo, you can take too much aspirin and cause bleeding issues. So you can overdo anything. We can consume too much water and kill ourselves. So dose dictates poison. But when taking these, at least the product technology that I've developed over the past 15 years, when you take this as indicated, there's really been no issues for safety whatsoever. And we're very deliberate on that.
So how long have you known about nitric oxide and this huge impact it has on physical health? How long have we known about that?
Nitric oxide, the molecule, was first discovered in the late 70s, early 80s. And then once the mechanism was completely elucidated on how it signals in the cardiovascular system, a Nobel Prize was awarded in medicine in 1998. So since 1998, it's really been there was a lot of promise around nitric oxide in the scientific and medical community. And then it kind of fizzled out because nobody had figured out how to make a solid dose form of nitric oxide or how to safely and effectively deliver a gas to a human, except in a hospital setting where you could actually give it through a nasal cannula. And so that's what we've been trying to do for the past 20 years. In fact, it's the basis for my entire research program in academia, was how do we create product technology that recapitulates nitric oxide production in the human body and then fixes the reason people can't make it. And that's the basis for what I've been doing for the past 10 to 15 years. And the importance of that is really, we understand nitric oxide biochemistry and physiology to the extent that now we have safe and effective product technology. The challenge for us is educating the masses, right? So it's not a lack of information. It's the translation and the application of the information to clinical practice, to patient care, and really to the masses worldwide.
I've heard that, and I've witnessed that the poor doctors are under such stress with the insurance company dictating how much volume they do and everything else, that they really don't have time to do anything except have a drug rep come in and tell them what does what and give them samples. But to really get down deep and dirty and research to the point that you have so that they truly understand nitric oxide and how to treat it would be a little unreasonable to expect. Is this the case? And if so, how can we have that?
Yeah, no, look, you're spot on. The system is broken. The doctors are decent human beings who had good intentions. The system in which they operate is broken, and they're really handcuffed. Because the way medicine's practiced today, once you make a diagnosis, you have a finite number of responses you can give that patient. And if you venture outside of those finite responses, which is called the standard of care, then the physician, risk losing his license by the boarding agencies. So, and two, the cost of medicine is so expensive now that in order for physicians to make a living, they've got to see, 40, 50, 60 patients a day. And there's no way you can get a complete medical history on what's wrong with an individual patient in 10 minutes or less. It's just physically impossible. And that's the reason that doctors aren't making patients better today, especially in the US. We have the sickest population on earth, and we spend the most money per capita than any industrialized nation in the world. And yet we're the sickest. And it's not because there's a lack of information or lack of research. I retired from academia, 5 or 6 years ago because I felt that we don't need to do any more research. We know all the answers to chronic disease, and we know how to fix it. Now my objective is to get this information out there and really change the system so that now physicians can actually get to the root cause of disease, but more importantly, have safe and effective technology that they can give their patients that aren't making them sicker, but actually make them better. And that's a completely new model in medicine.
And it's also going to take a while to implement, I would think.
Now, look, we're going against some very powerful forces. Big pharma doesn't like what we're doing, because when you start to have this conversation of how do we get patients off of prescription medications, you're taking away a customer. And no big business likes to lose a customer. So it's very disruptive what we're doing, but the health of our future, the future health of our nation and our kids depend upon this. And the current healthcare system is not sustainable. It will crash upon itself. And when it does, there'll be a new system ready to jump in place.
Is there a movement in that direction, having a new system in the sidelines?
I see it. I taught in medical schools for more than a decade and teaching future physicians. And, a lot of good doctors that were in insurance and work for hospital systems and academia have left. Now they've gone to cash practices. And so I think there's an insurgency of well-intended doctors who got sick and tired of their patients being sick and tired, and them not making their patients better by the way they were practicing medicine. And so now that there's a groundswell. I see it. I give 40 or 50 lectures around the world every year to a number of physicians and healthcare practitioners, and there's a growing awareness and a growing need for this, and there's a growing participation.
Is there some localized information base where people can find out about this?
There are many different really good organizations, probably too many to mention, and I'm drawing a blank now, but, if you look for this, functional medicine, integrative practitioners, there's a large group called the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, who are mainly cash practice, tens of thousands of physicians strong. And we meet twice a year. We'll be meeting in Vegas in the second weekend in December at the Longevity Fest at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. That's a great resource because these are really, aligned physicians trying to make an impact in medicine.
Well, it's that magic moment again. We have to take another station break. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Is there a wonder gas that can slow aging? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Nathan S Bryan. His website, let's see if I get this right, n101.com.
You got it. Perfect.
All right, I did it.
One nitrogen, one oxygen.
Okay, so that'll be easy to remember. And when we're working with nitric oxide, how fast can we expect with supplementation? How fast can we expect to see improvement, and in what arenas?
Well, we've done extensive testing on this product technology, both during development and since clinically. So when we put the lozenge in our mouth, and we can do an ultrasound of the carotid artery, so that's the main artery that's going up the neck. So we've been able to notice a dilation of the carotid artery within 12 to 15 seconds of this lozenge being put in your mouth. So the nitric oxide that we're releasing in the lozenge is absorbed. It binds to other biomolecules. It basically dilates the carotid artery in a matter of seconds. We've done other clinical studies where we can take people with an elevation in blood pressure, and with usually 15 or 20 minutes, we can start to normalize and support healthy blood pressure. We've got studies people taking this for 30 days at a time. We can improve time trials for exercise capacity. So, everybody's different, but we see these quantifiable, verifiable, clinically relevant endpoints every time someone takes the lozenge. Now, whether you feel it or not, you may not feel your carotid arteries dilate. If they're certainly obstructed or there's some level of stenosis in there, you'll certainly feel it. But when I take the lozenge, I don't necessarily feel the effects, but we've had really sick people, poor health, take it and they can feel it immediately as soon as they put it in their mouth.
So if someone's, going into heart distress, can taking a lozenge help that, like nitroglycerin?
Nitroglycerin. Well, these are supplements not intended to treat, prevent, or cure disease, but mechanistically and scientifically, I can speak to that, because the reason people take nitroglycerin for ischemic heart disease and angina is because these drugs are metabolized into nitric oxide, and then they dilate the coronary arteries and they relieve the ischemic pain known as angina. So the lozenge does similar things. Obviously, it's a completely different mechanism of activation, and it doesn't lead to tolerance like nitroglycerin, but you still get the nitric oxide release. You can dilate the coronary arteries, and so it's been proven very effective. And we had a number of physicians that have used this in their patients. In fact, through my drug company, Bryan Therapeutics, we've got our lozenge technology that we're developing as a drug specifically for ischemic heart disease, for that, to replace things like nitroglycerin or isosorbide. Because we know from long-term outcome studies that these drugs actually make patients worse when taken chronically.
So is the nitroglycerin and Viagra have the same problem, that they're trying to initiate something without enough nitric oxide present?
Well, completely different mechanism of action. So nitroglycerin is what we call an organic nitrate. So it's a nitro tied to 3 glycerol backbones. So it has to be metabolized into nitric oxide gas by mitochondria in the cell. So early on, you can do that, but you lead to tolerance. So you develop what's called tachyphylaxis. And so the body's no longer able to metabolize nitroglycerin into nitric oxide. And so the effectiveness of these drugs become less and less the more often the patient takes it. And that's a very serious problem, because if they're developing angina or have some type of ischemia in their heart and the nitroglycerin doesn't work, then there's no rescue therapy. These patients are at risk of having a myocardial infarction because of no blood flow through the heart. So that's a metabolism issue with nitroglycerin. In terms of drugs like Viagra, it's a nitric oxide problem.
Okay.
So it's a completely different mechanism.
Completely different mechanism. Okay, so when we're starting to try to address this with our diet,
Yep.
what advice do you have for people?
Well, I tell people that nitric oxide science is very complex and very complicated, but the solutions to nitric oxide problems are very simple. And so it's really diet and lifestyle. So I tell people, stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production, and then start doing the things that are clinically shown to promote it. So one by one. Number one, we have to change our diet. Less sugar, more green leafy vegetables. Number two, if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. You don't take an antibiotic every day for the rest of your life because of the destruction it does on the gut microbiome. So by the same reason, why would you take an oral antiseptic every day for the rest of your life, destroying the oral microbiome, which is extremely important in generating nitric oxide? The other problem is fluoride. Fluoride is an antiseptic. It's a neurotoxin that kills your thyroid. So if you're using a fluorinated toothpaste, you have to stop. Go to your dentist, reject fluoride. Fluoride is one of the most poisonous toxins in the periodic table. So you don't need fluoride, and then stop using antacids. So now if we change our diet to include more green leafy vegetables, we allow the oral microbiome to completely repopulate, and we allow our stomach acid to actually secrete and make stomach acid, now we're able to produce nitric oxide through our own dietary patterns. And if we start to exercise, that stimulates the enzyme that makes nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels. And if we start getting 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight a day, which stimulates nitric oxide release in the skin, then it's really that simple. And then when all else fails, we have product technology that does it for you. But we encourage people, always use diet and lifestyle as the first line therapy. Change your diet, change your lifestyle, stop using mouthwash, get rid of fluoride, get rid of antacids, and the body heals itself. It's remarkable.
And it's pretty much of a free fix, isn't it?
Right. It's cost savings, actually, right? You no longer have to buy the scope, the Listerine, or the expensive fluorinated toothpaste, or the antacids. It's cost saving.
Exactly. It's about that time in the show, Doctor, when I get to ask, what's your mission?
My mission, it was an epiphany to me years ago when I realized, I knew nitric oxide was important from a scientific and research perspective. But when I started going out and giving lectures and realized how few people knew about how important nitric oxide was, and then as we advanced the research and really understood that nitric oxide is foundational for optimal health and disease prevention. So we have to get this message out there. And so my mission is educating the world's population on the importance of nitric oxide and what they can do to replete and restore their own production of nitric oxide. Because we're never going to solve chronic disease. We're never going to extend longevity if we don't first focus on nitric oxide. But I will say it's not a silver bullet. It's not an end-all, be-all, cure-all, because there are other things wrong with many, many patients. But fundamentally and foundationally, your body cannot and will not heal without nitric oxide. So we start there, allow the medical profession to dig a little bit deeper, interrogate the patient on a personal level, and then fix other things. But you can fix other things, but if you don't fix nitric oxide, the patient's never going to get better. Start with nitric oxide. Everything else you do will work better.
I understand that you have another book coming out shortly. What's the name of it?
I do. So this book is called The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing Nitric Oxide to Life. And it's two-part. It's part autobiographical because, over the past 20 years, we've made some really fundamental seminal discoveries that changed the way we thought, the entire medical community thought about nitric oxide. And so it's meant to be, an encouragement against all odds. How do you keep going? How do you persist and follow your dreams and do what we're called to do? And then number two, it's to build awareness around nitric oxide, to educate the masses, the readers, on what nitric oxide is, why it's so critically important for their own health, and then some simple steps and applications that they can apply to their own life to restore their nitric oxide and really take control of their own health. Because our goal in medicine should be that people live and never get sick to where they never have to see a physician. My mission is to put all physicians out of business, except obviously emergency room physicians for trauma. But primary care, there should be no need for primary care if we do our job as educators and get the information out there on how to take control of your own health. And it should be that simple.
So that will be available on your website along with the one that you have published now, yes?
We're going to launch that in probably the first quarter of 2024. It's with a major publisher. So we'll be doing a media tour, but it should be out first part of 2024. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. So what's your vision for the shift and evolution of healthcare?
Well, I don't think, I know. So there's three levels of conviction. There's I think, I believe, and I know. So what I've come to know based on the science and versus what we've done to date is that nitric oxide will be the future of medicine. And I don't think there will be a single indication where nitric oxide-based therapy will not provide benefit. And I think once we do that and get to the root cause of chronic disease, which is inflammation, immune dysfunction, and oxidative stress, which, by the way, nitric oxide regulates all of them, then we really have a way to take control of our own health. And it'll save trillions of dollars in healthcare. People will become better. But there has to be a change. There has to be an impetus for this change because drug therapy is not the answer. Surgery is not the answer in most cases. So we've got to recapitulate physiology, understand this principle of what we do in drug discovery. It's not pharmacology. We're not developing synthetic compounds. What we do is restorative physiology. And that was the original basis of medicine, restorative physiology or applied physiology. That's the concept. That's the only way it works. Give the body what it needs and the body heals itself. Drugs and physicians don't heal patients. Patients heal themselves.
So we've gotten ourselves into this pickle where we're deficient on so many things, nitric oxide being on top of the list. Our longevity right now, what's our life expectancy right now, and what do you see it expanding to if these steps are taken?
Well, I don't think humans are immortal, but I do think we can live a much longer lifespan. In fact, I think if you look over the past several decades, it's the first time in the history of mankind where there's a decrease in life expectancy. So we may be living not as long, but we're certainly not living better. So I don't think it's beyond, reality to live to be 120, 150 years old. And I think what we're doing in terms of, there's objective measures of this. There's telomere length, there's mitochondrial function, there's stem cells. So the older we get, we continue wearing ourselves out. We just got to repair and replace with our own stem cells. And nitric oxide is the signal that tells our stem cells to go and repair and replace dysfunctional tissues. And it's the molecule that tells our telomeres not to shorten, shorter telomeres, shorter lifespan. So if we can prevent telomere shorten, maintain mitochondrial function, maintain an ample source of stem cells that get the signal to go and repair and replace tissues, then we can live a much longer. But more importantly, to me, it's not about how long we live, it's how well we live as long as we live.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it is about time for us to close the show. But I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom, but also for doing all the work to unearth this information.
Well, thank you. Look, it's been a great honor and pleasure. It's been certainly not without its challenges. But when you change one person's life, it said you've changed the world. And the most gratifying thing that I've done over the past 15, 20 years is just get the dozens and hundreds of phone calls and emails and texts of people that we've changed their lives based on a very simple molecule. So there's nothing more gratifying than that.
Unfortunately, it's that point we are out of time. Our guest this hour has been Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Dr. Bryan is an international leader in molecular medicine and nitric oxide biochemistry and the author of Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition. To find out more about him, visit his website, n101.com. This is Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or past archived episodes, visit us at missionevolution.org. But most importantly, be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.